Let's talk about power level.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to Commander Countdown. In today's episode, we are going to be going over the top 5 ways for you guys to assess your deck's power level. But before we do that, we wanted to talk about 2 of our honorable mentions that don't necessarily deal directly with the power level of your deck, but we thought they were worth mentioning. Veggie, do you have an honorable mention for us?
Yeah, I think one of the things you always should be talking about is your player experience level. Putting a precon in the hands of an experienced Magic player is very different from putting a CEDH deck in the hands of somebody that just learned how to play.
Yeah, definitely. And when you first said player experience, I thought you meant like whether we're having fun, which, you know, is important,
also
but
important, yes.
Definitely not what you meant. I agree, because I think sometimes I build a deck and someone's like, oh, there's an infinite combo, or they hand me a deck and they say it's an infinite combo. And I'm like, oh, even if I were to have these cards, that is not the way my brain would have necessarily played them, because I'm not usually sort of looking at those interactions. I'm kind of face value on the cards, having less experience in general.
Yeah, because like a lot of strategies are like, okay, I'm going to do some stuff. I'm going to tutor for my combo. And then you'd be like, all right, I'm going to tutor. Oh, this looks like a solid card for the situation. I'll take this. Where it's like, oh, if I had read one of these 99 cards all the way through, sure, I would have gotten there. But
yeah, I'm always looking for, oh, this looks good in the situation. You're absolutely right. Versus a thing where I'm like, oh, I don't even necessarily know this is in the deck, or know its interaction with possible other things, because that is a lot. And I feel like once you hit that level, you are a much more experienced player.
Yeah. And like those understandings of like, you know, Magic fundamentals and, you know, different mechanics, and that gives you a big advantage over other players. So just your deck's like on paper power level is not always the only thing to consider when you're sitting down on the table.
I agree. One of the biggest things, like I've played a lot of Magic and I'm a pretty good Magic player in general, but very inexperienced in Commander. And I know I am not using the tools I have to their fullest like extent and ability when you hand me a deck, because I just don't notice the things. Yeah,
I've played a lot of Commander, but my my Magic ability is not quite as good. So, you know, it balances out.
Let's go ahead and move on to my honorable mention, which is a thing I like to consider because I can't build a lot of combo decks with high power level. So what I usually judge my decks when I build them is how many of the like signpost powerful cards I have. And again, it is not a big indication to how powerful the deck is, because I feel like that is more fine tuning and some other topics we will get into here in the episode. But for me, it's cards like Rhystic Study or, Craterhoof Behemoth. These cards themselves are very powerful in a vacuum and can do a lot of work, but it doesn't necessarily the deck is like built to take advantage of them to the fullest.
Right. Yeah. Like if a single card in your deck can give you a massive advantage in almost any situation, then that means that sometimes your deck is going to do a very strong thing that is unexpected.
Yeah. So like for me, I'm like, oh, I want to make this deck a little bit better because I'm playing with Veggie or people who I know play a lot of Commander. I'll throw in a Smothering Tithe and a Teferi's Protection. And then the rest of my deck is admittedly just kind of vanilla good cards, but not a lot of thought put into the rest of it, not very optimized. So I would rate that to be a little bit stronger because those cards themselves are strong, but the deck itself still just like isn't very flavorful.
Yeah. And you've mentioned a lot of good examples of these like iconic cards that can swing a game by themselves in a lot of situations. Like to me, Dockside Extortionist is like the poster boy for sometimes it's going to perform a lot better than its average. And that is a big thing to consider, because if you sit down and you're like, oh, well, this is a pile of jank. But then you dockside and you make 1 million mana, and even 10 jank cards in one turn is a much more powerful thing than one.
Yeah. So even if you're not trying to reach maximum level, but you are trying to sort of boost your deck a little bit, you can consider some of these signpost cards, or vice versa. If you're playing against some new players that have mostly precons, then just take those 2 or 3 cards out and you'll like drastically change the flow of your deck to sort of bring you to that same level.
Yeah. Ooh, that gives me then one good point is these cards are good and they are fun. Certainly play them, but for your best experience going to play with people that you don't know, make sure that you have some replacements. If you're running these cards, have a couple cards that you can just stick in a sleeve that take the same place but aren't quite as like powerful in their own.
Wow, Veggie, are you suggesting we have a commander sideboard?
I'm very much in support of that. Yeah, that's I don't know. RC, make it official. It's commander sideboards.
There's also been times in games where I don't necessarily realize my deck has something that, especially when it targets a single player, that just sort of like takes them out of the game. And I find those to be no fun. So I will just say, hey, this thing really sucks and it really shouldn't be in this game. I would like to cycle it away. And I've definitely done that. Especially if you have something that like destroys all artifacts and you don't really realize it's there and your friend is playing just like mono artifact deck. I think that's kind of crummy. Cycle.
Cycle.
Would that be a thing that you would do or be willing to let people do?
Yeah. And that's another like in that category of, you know, your commander sideboard. If you have some cards that you're like, oh, generically this is okay in a situation, but sometimes they are just like a game-ending silver bullet for particular strategies. You know, I want to have that option of like, oh, instead of this Vandal Blast, I'm gonna run something that kills 2 artifacts.
Yeah, I like that better for sure. Because this is Commander and I like to play to have fun. I mean, I've played competitive Magic where I don't really have a ton of fun no matter if I'm winning or losing, but this, I want to have fun regardless. All right, that's enough rambling from us. Those honorable mentions were definitely a lot to get into. So we're going to go ahead and talk about our top 5 ways for you guys to assess the power level in your deck. But before we get into those, we wanted to show you guys this little graphic that was made by someone in the community. We don't actually know who. So if you guys know, please let us know so we can give them the credit that is due in the description of the video. But in this graphic, it talks about the power level from 1 to 10, and that is the standard way that Magic players typically assess their deck.
Yeah, the number system, very, very popular. Absolutely the most used system for gauging your deck's power level. And in graphics like this, it's pretty well defined. It's actually a very solid system. However, nobody knows the system. Nobody knows the system. You know the numbers, but without a graphic like this, would you know definitively what each level meant? And your average Magic player, your average Commander player, doesn't. And for that reason, I don't like using this system, but it is the most widely used way to assess your deck.
Yeah, I think the biggest downfall with this particular graphic is not that it's vague or anything like that, but I feel like the player experience skews their perception of their deck. So for example, the best deck I know how to build is certainly not a 10 on the scale because I am just not a skilled builder. And a lot of people don't necessarily recognize that. So they're like, oh, I took out a couple of cards that I think are more powerful, so I'm going to give this a 7. But realistically, it's barely better than one of the 4 premium Commander decks, right? The premium the precons,
that are.
And I feel like that's kind of the level I build at is like 4, 5, maybe 6. So I might sit at a table and be like, oh, I toned it down a little bit. This is an 8 or a 7, but it's realistically not. And vice versa. Someone might lowball their deck just because they want to have a good game, and it's a tough scale to use live at the table.
Yeah. You all know the meme. Like, it's either CEDH is 10, anything that's not CEDH is 7, and if the deck is bad, it's a 6. Those are the only numbers that anybody uses.
Yes, I definitely agree. And this was actually the first time I saw this graphic, and it did put a lot of things into perspective for me, because I always thought my decks were, I'm probably building at like a 7. And according to this, I am certainly not. So it was definitely good to see. So let's clear a lot of that up by having a sort of game rule zero or session zero conversation with people at the table with the 5 things we're about to go over. This way, everybody has a more realistic feeling for what their opponent's decks are going to be doing and what deck they should be playing.
Let's start things off with fast mana. Fast mana. You may have heard the term before, but usually people will just say, oh, do you have fast mana? Or, oh, I'm running fast mana. If we define that a little bit more, we can understand why this is an important thing to consider in your deck building and your power level assessment. I consider fast mana to be anything that gives you a very large mana advantage, or something that is mana positive. So the amount of mana that you spend to get the thing is significantly lower than the mana that you get out of it.
Okay. So like Dockside would be a big sort of generator of excess mana.
Yeah. 2 mana to play this creature that is probably getting you somewhere between like as at least 5 and maybe 10 or so treasures. And that's significant. That's a lot of mana, and it's mana for whenever you want to use it, as opposed to something like Dark Ritual or Seething Song, where you do, that is mana positive. You get more mana than you spent, but you have to use it right then.
Yeah. So this was something I was actually a little hazy on until semi-recently. And, I'm not going to lie, still a little fuzzy on what counts. But I actually saw a Twitter post of someone talking about how someone had lied to them about saying they weren't using fast mana and then played turn 1 Soul Ring. Keep that in.
So that's okay. That post is probably a little, I don't know. That's okay. There's definitely truth to that. I
didn't mean to make you spit your drink out.
Soul Ring is, by definition, fast mana. You pay 1 mana, you get an extra 2 every turn for the rest of the game. That is a lot more mana than you spent to get the thing. It is the one exception because it is such a widely accepted card and something that you should expect every player to be running at the table.
It comes with every single precon. Mm-hmm. So you would kind of assume it's an auto include in any deck, no matter the colors, no matter what your deck is trying to do. Because it is, such a solid card. But yeah, the tweet was really funny, like just straight calling this person a liar because they, had the Soul Ring. But
other cards like Mana Crypt, you're spending 0 to get 2 mana every turn. Lands like Gaia's Cradle, you are just using your land drop to get a whole bunch of mana every turn if you're playing creatures.
Chat, we would like to know, of course, in the comments what you guys think about fast mana. How powerful does this make your deck? So on and so forth. Let's go ahead and get to number 4.
Combos.
Yeah. How many combos do you have in your deck, if any?
Combos that end the game.
Yeah.
So it may be, if I play these 2 cards, they go infinite, and I do infinite damage to everybody. I automatically win. Or it might be a combo where it's like, if I get these 2 permanents on the board, no one can play spells anymore. That is, if you have an effect that powerful, that's something that you want your table to know, but also really helps to define how powerful your deck is overall.
Yeah, so you can definitely give your deck a boost in points if you have one, and a much bigger boost in points if you have multiple, or ways to sort of like fish it out. But actually, this will be a little bit of a shorter one because it does lend itself very well to number 3. So the other thing that goes along with those combos is how well your deck interacts with other decks. Now that is 2-sided coin, how well you interact with their abilities and how well people can interact with you. If you're able to stop just about anything, very powerful. If you are able to just do things without people being able to stop you, also very powerful. That can be combos or just general game plans as well.
Oh yeah. Because those combos are not quite so bad if it's like, hey, I need 4 pieces to this, and if you destroy any of them, then I can't do it.
And one's like an artifact, one's a creature, one's an enchantment, right. And like chances are one of the 3 players can, get rid of that pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. But if it's, I have 2 cards that will combo to win, and they are both instants. I don't know what that combo would be. It's probably a real good combo, but
or one is hexproof.
Right. Then there are very few options for the rest of the players to be able to interact with it. And that's a lot more powerful than a 4-card combo.
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to not put a lot of combos in my deck, and I do think that is part of why it gets scaled back. A, I just don't really know them, and B, I don't really have fun doing the thing. I'm just like, oh, I'm going to do this and make an infinite amount of mana, and then you'll be dead, and I'll show you how, and you just have to accept it. I don't know. That's not me. I'm not a huge fan. I like turning things sideways or milling people out. That's my favorite.
Well, I'll have to introduce you to some infinite mill combos. I do say one very important thing to note here is, especially for interactions, free spells. This would probably be the most important thing to assess for how interactable your deck is for the average player. If you're running free counter spells, there's a difference between knowing, oh, if that player has tapped out, I can mess with their stuff, versus I will never know if I can blow up that thing. They might just force of will me. Or there's deflecting SWAT in red. There's deadly rollick in black. There's snuff out in black. There's a lot of spells that you can play without any mana, and that changes the game as far as interaction goes.
Oh yeah, didn't I have a white one that was free with my commander that made everything like indestructible?
Yeah,
I remember that
maneuver.
Card. Yeah, that was a cool one. Yeah, that definitely makes things really hard because players can't even anticipate what they need to play around, if you are tapped out, but you're still able to do these sort of like huge game swinging things that they cannot interact with. That's a really tough spot to be at.
Yeah. So if you're running those cards, for sure, your deck is a little more powerful.
Now we're moving really high in the list. We're at number 2. So this is one of the best indications to how powerful your deck is, both in that graphic, but also just for you to let your opponents know at the table to ensure that everybody's bringing something equally balanced to the table. And the second one is how optimized is your deck?
Yeah. Have you put in the work? Have you scoured the pages of EDHRec?
I have not.
Then this would be an indication that your deck is a little less powerful. And we all love our builds. You have that one deck where you're like, I've had this since I started playing Magic, and over the years I've just gotten exactly the best cards to fit this strategy. That means that it's a lot more powerful. You've put a lot of energy into figuring out, I was doing this thing that costs 3 mana, but I found a version of it that only costs 2 mana. It does the same thing. And if every card in your deck has gotten that same love, then it means it's a lot better.
Well, it's sort of the commander version of competitive players when they play, when they go and get the $10 Wild Slash instead of the Shock, right? Like, it's likely playing exactly the same, and it usually doesn't matter, but you're willing to spend the extra $9.98 because, it might be a little bit better. That's the amount of love you're putting into your deck.
That brings up a really good point. If you have spent a lot of money on your deck, it is probably a better deck. Of course, there are exceptions to that. There's a lot of garbage on the reserve list that is expensive because it's on the reserve list. But in general, better cards cost more money. So
yes, that is definitely true. We actually are building a community deck list right now. And I noticed, I was like, oh no, we can't build this, Veggie. This is probably too strong for our show. And it was like $1,600 when we put it into Moxfield. But then I started looking at it and I'm like, oh, it's mostly like, a themed deck with a lot of uncommons and uncommons, not a ton of money in the bulk, 65 cards. But then I looked at the mana base and I was like, oh, there's just every single duel under the sun here with a bunch of common and uncommons from drafts. So it is a good way to sort of judge the indication of your deck specifically, but it's not foolproof, right? Your deck could just be $1,600 and actually not really be very scary at all.
Mm-hmm. Just send me your duels and I will send you back one card that is better than one other card in your deck. And I think that's a pretty good deal.
Okay, I'm in. I have no duels. It's fine. We're almost there. The final way for you guys to determine the power level of your deck, and I think that this is the biggest part of the conversation you need to be having, way beyond just giving your deck a number value. And that is the turn that your deck is doing the thing. So, if your deck is trying to set up on turn 5 and 6, that is way different than a deck trying to set up on turn 1 and 2 with a turn 3 or 4 kill.
The turns in which your deck can take over the game is the most defining characteristic of your power level. And that's not always winning the game outright. It could be like, I can usually swing for lethal damage on the table on like turn 5. Great. That's your important turn. If you're able to finish the game on turn 5, there's your important turn. But also, if you're like, hey, usually I've gotten all of my stacks pieces out by turn 5, that also means that your deck has taken over the game potentially on turn 5. That would also be your important turn.
A lot of times tables will sort of discuss the thing that, what is the meanest thing my deck can do? And then give it sort of a range where it's like, if my deck runs absolutely perfect, if I were to stack my deck, I could be winning the game on turn 5 or 6. But most likely, I'm playing a Crater Hoof on turn 7 or 8 after I've built up some stuff and ramped. So it sort of gives people a little bit of a range to know what to expect from you so that they can bring something of equivalent power.
Yeah. Because if you put this in perspective of all the other things that we've said so far, you can be running fast mana, but it could be because you want to play these garbage big mana spells. You could be running these game-ending combos, but you can't get them out until turn 10.
Or you don't know that they're there.
Right, or you don't know that they're there. And you can optimize for a strategy that doesn't really that can't get going until later. None of that matters nearly as much as, I can take over this game on X turn, and if that is before everybody else at your table, your deck is a better deck than theirs. Absolutely.
So one of the graphics that we were looking at broke it down in a really nice way. So to help give you guys a little bit more perspective, if your game is, if your deck is taking over the game on turns 1 through 4, you're looking at more powerful CEDH. If it is closer to 5 through 8, you're looking at mid-level 6-ish range, 7, depending. And if it's anything after turn 8, then you're looking lower power, more pre-con style power levels at the table.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, we looked at several different graphics before going into making this video, and I do think that all of the graphics were very well thought out and defined power levels very well. The problem is that nobody knows them. And even if they think they know them, they're wrong. And then they let their own player and build experience mess it up, right? Because a 10 on your building skill is not the same as a 10 CEDH.
But hopefully some of these points give you a good range, about where your deck lies. And that's the whole point. You just want to be able to have your deck in the same range as everybody else at your table, because then even games make for a fun time.
Absolutely. We will actually put a link in the description to this graphic if you guys want to check it out a little bit more in depth, so you can gauge the power level of your decks going into your games. Print it out, show it to other people who maybe have trouble assessing their own power level. But above all else, if given the opportunity, we really think that going over these 5 points in a little bit of detail before shuffling up and deciding your decks that you're going to be playing at that game is way better than just giving it a blanket number. Next up, we're going to be going over today's deck list submitted by one of our patrons. And don't forget, if you guys would like to support this content and get your deck list featured on the show, or even get into some spell table games or some signed tokens from us, make sure you guys head over to our Patreon where you guys can support us directly and help us create more of this content.
Today, we're going to be looking at a list for Teysa Karlov as submitted by our patron Lucius. So we're starting off with a commander that can double death triggers and helps out your tokens.
I am a big Teysa fan. I play a ton of Orzhov, and my very first commander deck was actually Teysa. Not this one, but another one.
Well, we're starting hot out of the gate here. Bolas' Citadel for sure falls into the category of some powerful
high power signpost card. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Astronaut's Altar, a big combo piece in a lot of decks as well.
Yes, and I'm pretty positive this deck has got some game-ending combos that can be done with the Astronaut's Altar, with the Phyrexian Altar. Let's see. As far as at least the artifacts, it doesn't look like there was any fast mana. Of course, we have the Soul Ring,
which kind of counts.
But none of the other mana rocks that usually are associated with that.
We have a couple of cool cards with the Crested Sunmare and one other one up here. They look really cool and synergistic with the deck, but maybe not optimized.
Yeah, these are, I like these picks. These are very fun and flavorful choices. Like the Butcher Malakir, that effect in this deck is very powerful, and the Crested Sunmare is just a cool card. But I would definitely agree. I don't think they are like the optimal, competitive choices. They're probably like either pet cards or just more fun with this strategy.
And then we've got another Signpost card. Again, not super powerful within the deck itself, but just powerful on its own, and that's Esper Sentinel.
Yeah, that definitely bumps this deck up a little bit. Card is good. Let's see.
Overall, seeing a very cool theme, but not necessarily a ton of very unique cards fit for a very specific job, right? We're just sort of filling out the deck with some very flavorful, strong cards that fit the job.
And then I hit the Oathsworn Vampire. This one in particular does, I think, have a specific job in this deck. Its job is to win the game. This is for sure a combo piece. You put this together with like the Phyrexian Altar that we saw earlier and the Pitiless Plunderer here. That's infinite sacrifices. And we've seen plenty of like Blood Artist effects and things like that. So there's a combo that will certainly end the game. But yeah, a lot of the other cards here are just like, contributing to an overall plan, I think.
There's another one, Zulaport Cutthroat as well.
And our guy, Sir Conrad.
Every time it comes out of the graveyard, that's another way to just win the game, right? So there are multiple things that will trigger that interaction to work, not just a 3-piece combo, but it's like a 3-piece combo that have multiple pieces of each.
Right. You're pointing out the black market, right? This card is very powerful, and if you think about the description of fast mana from before, I said something where you get a lot more mana than what you put into it, right? Which this does do. You get a bunch of creatures that are dead, a bunch of counters. It's going to make more mana than before. However, I wouldn't put it under the fast mana category because you can't play it fast. It costs 5 mana.
And it takes a long time to build up. You're not getting that instant payoff like you do with like a Dockside.
Right.
This sort of, when I think of these cards, I feel like it is sort of the long game attrition to allow you to continuously play your commander. When you have a very commander heavy deck that needs the commander to be on board, I love cards like this to sort of help get you to where, those single pieces of removal are not sort of taking you out of the game. But I agree, not a fast mana sort of enabler.
Yeah. Although it does make me have feelings picturing this on the board with Teysa and getting the double counters for every creature dying. That's nice.
Now we do have our first 2-piece combo here, and I actually found this on accident in a deck one time. I didn't know it was there, and I just played it, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. I think everyone's dead. But completely by accident. Yeah, Sanguine Bond and Exquisite Blood.
Yeah, I mean this one it's there on the page. Like you don't think about it initially, like maybe putting in the deck. I'm sure Lucius did, but it's just like, an opponent loses life, I gain life. Great, that makes sense. I gain life, an opponent loses life. All right, that makes Yep, I put them both in there to interact with all of my other triggers, not really thinking that they would interact with each other. And, I'm still a baby commander player, so I don't really put those things together that quickly. And that does give us our first, for sure game ending combo. Is 2 5-mana enchantments that straight up win.
And they're both enchantments, which is something I want to make note of because not a lot of decks can deal with enchantments very easily. Most black decks have one way, feed the swarm, and that's
it.
kind of it. Maybe a chaos warp from red. Like we're not doing a ton of things with enchantments. So you have to kind of hope that the 1 or 2 players at the table who have access to that sort of removal actually have it in hand. So it's not a hard combo to get off.
Yeah. So raise the power level on this for sure. Let's talk about interaction a little bit, because there are 2 very significant cards here: Dictate of Erebos and Grave Pact. This allows you to interact with your opponent's creatures all the time, forever. Whenever you sack a creature, they have to sack a creature. And we've seen what's in this deck consistently. You're going to have the creatures to spare. So often your opponents don't get to play creatures.
Or even if you don't have the creatures to spare, you're getting value out of those creatures with the, the triggers that are happening when you do sack the creature, or you have the ability to replay it back out of the graveyard. So, the sacrifices are much less painful for you.
Yeah, that's doubly a good point, because part of interaction is not even just that you can interact with people. It's harder for them to interact with you. Each opponent has to consider, well, if I kill their creature, which of my creatures am I going to sacrifice? So that makes it that much harder for them to interact. On the flip side, a little bit though, not a lot of instant speed targeted removal if we're not looking at creatures. We just have the Generous Gift in the other end.
Yeah, so if they mess with those pieces that allow you to get value from your sacrifices, honestly, this is a pretty light suite of interaction. It is all pretty much instant speed, which is beneficial, but certainly not as robust as I would expect to see in an Orzhov deck.
All right, quick look through the mana base.
It looks solid, but certainly not optimized.
Yeah, it'll get the job done. You'll be able to cast your spells, no problem.
That's about where I build my decks, is just like, oh, I have access to these lands and they're all, duels. I have a good number of sources. Let's put them in, but I'm not going to spend, $50 on a specific land or 30 for the one of fetch.
Right. All right. So here we've seen all of the instants and sorceries. And as far as I can tell, we have only one tutor. It's a pretty good tutor. But it means that access to like that infinite combo that we saw, or any of the other big power pieces, are not going to be super consistent. So that does bring our power level down a little bit, I think. Yeah,
having them in your deck is not necessarily the only piece that matters when assessing the value. It's the consistency that how often you can bring them out. Now, I will say it is important to note that like each piece of that combo, there were multiple cards that would fulfill that job, because one is just sacrificing, one is like a return creature, which isn't terribly hard to find. But yeah, having a tutor would definitely help you get the third piece that you are missing. So important to note. Taking a look just at what we currently have.
It's a 7. We did all this work.
It's always a 7, Veggie.
It's got a solid game plan. A lot of the card choices are optimal, but not all of them. And it's going to be able to take over the game right around that like turn 8.
So now for the deck tech side of this, let's go ahead and look at some other options from EDHRec that we can maybe bump this up in power level, because again, some pieces of this very much recommend a 7 or an 8, like a higher end of that. So I feel like with just a few adjustments, we can boost that power level quite easily. So now jumping over to EDHRec, we're going to put in the commander's name and get some of the highest synergy cards that the website has to offer. Now, what they do is they take all of the commanders with this name and they compile the deck list to decide and show you what cards are being used most frequently, and also give you a synergy rating with those cards. So it's a really good tool to have when you guys are building these decks.
All right, as we go, I will point out Teysa Karlov, rank number 29 overall. So It means we've got a lot of data to say what our more optimal card choices are.
The 29th most played commander out of a lot of commanders is kind of impressive.
All right, high synergy cards. We saw a lot of these.
I saw the whole top row for sure.
Yes.
So that lends itself to be a lot more optimized. I saw the Bastion and Skeleton.
Blood Artist for sure. Okay, so we're seeing the majority of cards that are being used here.
I think this whole top row and everything except for sword, I think, in row 2.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, there's my first commander. That's the Teysa.
Yeah, we didn't see this other Teysa in the list. Yeah, I think actually consistently what I'm seeing that weren't in the deck are some of the 1 and 2 mana creatures that give you an extra some extra value. I think they were mostly replaced with like some bigger impact cards, right? And fun stuff for later on in the game.
So maybe that has to do with, the consistency, how we were saying, like, technically it could win on turn 5, but not likely to do so. Mm-hmm. And part of that is because you haven't laid enough groundwork in turns 1 through 4.
Right.
Was Priest of the Forgotten Gods in the deck?
I don't remember.
I don't remember seeing that card. Our fact checker just confirmed that Priest of the Forgotten Gods was not in the deck, and actually neither was Mondrak.
Yeah. So I think like maybe the inclusion of those would if you wanted to bump it up a little bit. Yeah. So now we're getting into some more interaction. Yeah. I think some choices here, Despark, Mortify, Fracture, some ways to deal with other permanent types would also give this deck a little bit more of an edge against strategies that it cannot deal with. Yeah, or yield Teferi's Protection.
One of those just straight signpost powerful cards, maybe replace like the Goat, Ram, like cards like that, which are not necessarily super powerful, like on their own and don't serve a strong purpose in the power level of the deck. Also, Vampiric Tutor.
Oh yeah, yeah. You can always toss in the suite of tutors, because we also didn't see like Demonic Tutor or like Imperial Seal. Any of those cheap tutors that would get you to that infinite combo quickly would be a very easy way to bump this up.
So overall, it looks like the deck is in a pretty good spot, plays like a 6 or a 7, has the ability to pop off like an 8. Mm-hmm. If you want to make it more consistently an 8, I would say optimize the mana base, add in a few more tutors, and a little bit more interaction, cutting maybe sort of like 5 to 8 of those sort of filler cards that, though synergistic and fun in the deck, is not really helping with the overall power level.
Yeah. And on the other side, if you wanted to knock this down a little bit, all you have to do, I think, would be pull out one of the pieces to the 2-card infinite combo, because there's not really your main strategy. Either one of them would help out a lot, but knowing that this deck doesn't have the potential to just slam 2 cards and win definitely pulls it down without detracting from what you want to do with the deck.
And maybe removing one of the altars as well, that sort of like stacked where you have multiple options to make those combos work.
Yeah.
Or if you have your heart set on keeping that 2-card combo, remove the tutor that helps you get them out together. Mm-hmm. Because a 2-card combo that both cost 5 with no way to search them up, how many games do you have to play for that to like come out? Yeah. Probably not a ton. And I would be okay with someone who had that happen 1 out of every, 20 games or something. All right, that about sums up our deck tech. Lucius has submitted a deck that is about a 6.5 to a 7 in power level, and you guys have the tools you need to either increase that power level or decrease it. Also, special thank you to Lucius for submitting this deck. We really appreciate your support. We couldn't make this content without you. Any final words on the conversation that people should be having going into their Commander games, especially now that events are back post-COVID?
Yes. The short version is, if you feel that you can facilitate a conversation and have the time to do so, I highly recommend it. The number system was initially created to do that thing, but now, because so many Commander players are cropping up here and there, not everybody knows this system, and so it's harder and harder for people to get an accurate measurement of that. If you talk about the points that we went over in this video today with the other people that you're playing with, then that can make for a much more accurate way to judge your decks together.
Yeah, in lieu of that, print out the graphic and show people and make them pick something that is actually a little bit more realistic. That's about it from us, guys. Make sure you leave us a comment down below. Let us know what you guys think of both the 1 through 10 system and the graphic, as well as these talking points. We would love to hear from you, your experiences going into new games with new players. And that's it. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, we'll see you next time on
Commander Countdown.